Welcome back to Jinka Jabo. The left has made victimhood prestigious, profitable, and in some respects, almost revered. Today, I am going to be talking about the #1 selling book on Amazon right now, Dangerous by Milo Yiannopolous, released in 2017. Dangerous is the manifesto and story of self-described provocateur, professional troll, and dangerous faggot Milo Yiannopolous. Deciding against the libertine life, Milo decided that he would go into political journalism. As a homosexual, it made him a novelty in both UK and American politics. I will sum up the first few chapters quickly in that anyone familiar with his story already knows about his ban from Twitter, his problems with Leslie Jones, the distinction he makes between himself and Richard Spencer, and how he is often mischaracterized in the press. He refuses to consider himself part of the alt-right, and he condemns the work of white nationalist Richard Spencer, leader of the alt-right. It's a very good setup for the book, especially for the uninitiated. But for people like me who are well familiar with Milo's work, it's something that we've all heard before. There are also, in my lay opinion, what I consider to be a few blind spots. He doesn't talk about PewDiePie or James Rolfe or JonTron, even though he talks about gamers a great deal. Also, he doesn't talk about the Trump campaign as much as I expected that he would. The book is structured as follows. Milo goes chapter by chapter explaining why different groups hate him. Finally, talking about why gamers like him, and then why his college tours were so awesome. I don't think those riots would have been that fun, however. Shortly after the release of Dangerous, I was able to catch a Milo moment live outside of Simon & Schuster in New York, where he was there to present them with a lawsuit for not publishing his book. Even at that early stage, it had already shot up to #1 in the charts. A reporter at the scene asked Milo what part of the book he found the most difficult to write, and he said it was the chapter on Black Lives Matter. I think the chapter on Black Lives Matter was the most interesting, and it had the most useful information for new conservatives like myself. It was Milo working through Breitbart that exposed Shaun King. Here is Jeffrey Shaun King as a child next to Jeffrey Shaun King today. A self-appointed leader of Black Lives Matter, who attended a historically black college on an Oprah Winfrey scholarship, had, according to his birth certificate, a white mother and a white father. It was Milo who broke the story. Canada has J-Rock, England has LEG, and we have Talcum X. In the next chapter, Milo talks about feminism, and to my great surprise, he actually endorses feminism. No, not the feminism that we supposedly need in our United States, which has inflated numbers for college rapes and still perpetuates the wage gap myth. But rather, he wants feminism for the Middle East. Of course, before talking about the atrocities committed against women in the Middle East, he first talks about the supposed male privilege that we experience in the United States and how much of that is not true. For example, the number of rapes in colleges, widely publicized as 1 in 4 women, is simply incorrect. Furthermore, men have generally shorter lifespans. We are more likely to commit suicide. We stay in prison longer and we are more likely to get convicted. And counting prison, we are more likely to be raped. Now, Milo does not come forward with numbers from the Daily Stormer or Fox News to support these claims. In fact, he pulls a title from the Huffington Post. Men sentenced to longer prison terms than women for same crimes, study says. This study from the University of Michigan found that men, on average, experience 63% longer prison sentences than women. Milo also talks about how feminism has become anti-science. When we look at genders and we look at transphobia, these other concepts, we find that they do not comply with established scientific information. For some reason, modern feminism has embraced this idea of thousands of genders, of gender being separate from sex, and so on. When we look at many of their arguments, we find that they are simply not scientific. So really, what kind of feminism does Milo call for? Well, he calls for a rejection of the anti-feminist Sharia law, which is creeping up in Western society, and is maybe exemplified by activist Linda Sarsour, who became somehow head of the Women's March. A woman who proudly wears the hijab, unironically. A woman who supports Sharia law, unironically. Milo then goes on to talk about why the mainstream media hates him. Quote, "Everyone hates you, no one is afraid of you, no one believes what you say, and nobody owes you anything." Then Milo talks about why establishment gays hate him. Consider this quote from feminist Camille Paglia. "Homosexuality is not normal." Throughout the book, Milo talks about degeneracy, hating the mainstream, and not wanting to fit in. All feelings that I can relate to. Part of what makes Milo so great is that he's made conservatism palatable for a younger generation, for millennials such as myself, and for the upcoming Generation Z. It's no longer the party of stodgy old men like Bob Dole and George Bush and Ted Cruz. However, Milo, I think, draws too sharp a distinction. He talks a lot about how much he dislikes Ben Shapiro, for example. I happen to really like Ben Shapiro, and I don't think that there is much separating him and Milo. Milo's more of a supervillain, whereas Ben is more of a virtuous hero type. However, both are considered Nazis, and both cite a lot of the same information, and both draw a lot of the same conclusions about modern society, feminism, and Islam. Another great quote from this book comes from Chapter 9 on Muslims. "The left claims it opposes bigotry, yet Islam, the most bigoted ideology that exists today, is given a pass." How many times must we go through this? Why is the left supporting Islam? We look at gay rights in the Western world versus gay rights which do not exist in Saudi Arabia, where gays are routinely thrown off the top of buildings. And just like Ben Shapiro, Milo comes to the conclusion that moderate Islam is really a myth. A BBC survey found that 52% of UK Muslims think that homosexuality should be illegal. Milo goes on to talk about Gamergate, which I really don't know much about, which I suppose is a collection of stories rather than one big event. I'm not really a gamer, I haven't followed that in many years, so I don't know much about it. But I am subscribed to a few gamers on YouTube who get no mention at all. PewDiePie, with his 52 million subscribers, is the most famous YouTuber. Then we have James Rolfe and JonTron, each with millions of subscribers, who have all fallen victim to social justice warrior witch hunts. However, like the Canadian YouTuber JJ McCullough, I really don't care much about Gamergate. It is interesting to know that Milo has a huge fan base among the gamers, which I wasn't really aware of because I don't follow that news. Finally, he talks about his college tours, which I've had the pleasure of watching on YouTube over the last 18 months or so since I've been in Vietnam. This is the first election in history that I've watched so closely. 2016 was an amazing news year, and every day there was something new happening. Milo was often at the center of it all, so I got to know him well before picking up this book. I watched many hours of his speeches during his dangerous faggot tour around America on college campuses. Each day I would get red-pilled a little bit more by voices like his, Dave Rubin's, Sargon Avocad, and others. My favorite of Milo's speeches comes from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Here, I think he best matches up his description of supervillain and of his idols. Quote, "I idolized Mariah Carey, Paris Hilton, Skeletor, Darth Vader, and Margaret Thatcher." This photo from his Colorado Springs speech pretty much shows what all of them would look like blended together. Mariah Carey, Paris Hilton, Skeletor, Darth Vader, and Margaret Thatcher, right here in one. Milo wraps up by talking about how to become a dangerous faggot just like him. He makes an interesting point. I think Milo and I are the same age. We're both older millennials, but he's saying that the younger generation is even softer. Not because they are inherently weaker, but because they grew up with softer edges. Those of us who are a couple years older still remember things like Neverending Story and Marilyn Manson and movies and music that have really dark themes that required us to face up to harsh realities that did not allow us the comfort of safe spaces when we were younger. Things that at least challenge us to think a little bit outside of our own comfort zones. Today, and from what Milo has seen in his tours around college campuses around the country, he's found that everything is made to be safe. Everything is made to prevent people from harm, from experiencing dangerous emotions. That's what he is against. And that's what he thinks is required for us to be dangerous. We must be willing to open ourselves up to really dark and disturbing facts and statistics and media in order to allow us to more maturely approach the world around us. Overall, as someone who naturally has a bit of a bias, and I admit to that, I do recommend this book for everyone, especially for people who were like me a year ago, especially for people who are new to conservatism like myself. 2016 was a remarkable year, and this is one of many books that I hope will be written about it. There was just so much to digest. And that was the year that me and many Americans came to the conclusion that the same narratives about Black Lives Matter, about third wave feminism, the same messages that we were getting from the Young Turks and from our college professors could have been wrong. And we began challenging these and looking at the facts. We realized, as Milo repeats, and Stefan Molyneux and many of the other conservative speakers online, that feelings are not an argument. Facts matter more than feelings. And when we look at the facts, things get a lot trickier than the emotional narrative that we are fed every day by mainstream media. I definitely recommend this book for anyone who is willing to challenge their established political ideas. Not only that, but it's some of the most fun reading since Al Franken's books back in the day when I was in college. That same sense of humor, that same sense of feeling connected to the writer. This is from a completely different political persuasion, but I believe that Milo is on the right side of history, and I think that things are changing. And this book is a good testimony to how that is happening and what's going to happen next. Just like Al Franken, Milo uses humor and good sources to allow you to draw your own conclusions. And for even people who disagree with him, this would be a good book to read to understand everything that Milo is about and to be able to make more of a educated distinction between someone like Richard Spencer or Ben Shapiro or Alex Jones or any of these other strange voices we have in conservative America at this time. I give it 2 drumsticks up. What did you think about Dangerous? Have you read it? Do you plan on reading it? Will you not read it, and why? Please comment, like, and subscribe. And see you next time on Jinka Jabo.